Before we continue with the video, if you like what I'm doing here on this channel, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel a lot. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Welcome back to my Create an RPG series. In this episode, we will finally be moving past status effects, despite how awesome they are now with all their functionality, and moving to something that will be a little bit more active. We are now going to start making our characters' abilities and ability system. To make some administration for this, we will start off by creating a folder for it. So we'll create a folder, we call it abilities. Inside of here, what we will be creating first off is a blueprint class, type actor. We'll call this VP ability. This will be our base ability blueprint essentially. This one will have a lot of similarities with how we created our status effects. We remove actor begin overlap and event tick because we don't want those. And we want to have a similar structure where we allow multiple points for a child blueprint to hook into, so it can have some abilities or some specialities that differs from the base class if you want it. So we're trying to build some flexibility here. So starting off, we create a custom event. This custom event we call attempt use ability. Just like when we tried to add a status effect, we will try to use an ability. We might not be able to always succeed, so that's why we need to have that. And we can add a branch, and for now we can just simulate that it's always going to be working. But this is where we would be checking, like, do you have enough mana? Is something preventing you from using an ability? Do you have this ability or something like that? Any kind of check that you want to have to make sure that it's allowed to use. After that is done, we want to actually use the ability. So we will create something more. Custom event. We'll call this use ability. However, we're going to be doing this slightly different. And the reason for this is we want to make some space for our functionality down the line, which is we will be adding the functionality of tags for this as well. So we want to create another custom event. And we'll call this one, let's call it use ability pre-step. So this is the step before using an ability, but still after we have decided that it's allowed to use, we are allowed to use this. So essentially, we're calling pre-step over here when we have succeeded in using our ability. And in here, we will have some pre-step configuration code. And this part is the one that will most likely be overloaded by children, or possibly adding functionality on top of it. So we want to have it slightly separate from the pre-step, just so we can have some stuff here that we most likely want to have used in all cases, even if this one is completely overridden in a child essentially. If you want this removed in a child as well, you would have to remove or overwrite both of them essentially. That's what we're trying to attempt. Yes, so after we have done the pre-step, we want to use the ability. So for now, we're just going to be doing this. We're going to be calling it directly. We'll be adding the code that we want to have here at a later point. Going to our usability, we are going to be doing a few things. One of the things we most likely want to be doing in conjunction with an ability is play some kind of animation. And to be able to play an animation, we want to have access to our mesh of this character or whatever pawn we are using. And to do that, we want to have a flexible way of doing it. So getting owner will allow us to get the actor that we currently are, or being used by, this ability is belonging to essentially. But we now want to have whatever mesh belongs to this as well. So what we will be doing to make this flexible, because we might have different characters with different meshes and all kinds of like variations, different skeletons and stuff like that, we will just be creating an interface so that we don't need to care of what the specific owner of this ability is, it will just return the mesh that makes sense for it. So to do that, we can create, let's make a folder for it. Let's be good. So we'll create a folder called interfaces. And inside of here, we want to create this interface now. We're going to have having a pretty simple interface. It's going to be called, we find it on the blueprint interfaces. We'll call it BPI underscore get mesh. Is super descriptive. Let's use that. Instead of that, inside of that, we want to have one function, get mesh. And we want this function to return to us the skeletal mesh that we're interested in. So we'll just put in a output, and we'll say we want it to be a skeletal mesh. Skeletal mesh. There we go. Here we see it. So an object reference of that. And we'll say this is our, actually let's call it skeletal mesh so it's clear in the receiving end what it is. And then we're done. So now we go to our ability again, and we can just say get mesh. So we get the BPI mesh get message. That's a lot of S's in there. So at this point, we now have the mesh here, theoretically, but only if the interface is being implemented in that actor. So to make sure, we will have a not backward, valid running from this one to make sure that when we reach this point, we only want to continue with the code if we have a valid mesh, essentially. Because we might have something that doesn't have a skeletal mesh, or it might not be set up and stuff like that. So we need to have some fallbacks for that, essentially. So with that, we can now say we want to get an anim montage. Is that not how we write it? Get anim skeletal mesh of type skeletal mesh object reference. Should be okay. Right, we won't need one. Okay, so all right, so let's create a variable instead. We'll call this animation montage. So this will be the montage if the animation or the ability has an animation montage. And we'll make it of the type anim montage object reference. So, and we want to make use of this if it is valid. However, we want to make sure that this one is valid as well. So we'll right click and make a convert validated get. So if either of these two fail, either this one or this one, we want to abort essentially. But if they work, we want to play a montage. Like so. So let's make a reroute node down here for now. And we'll hook this one up as well to it. We can drag it out like so. So we want to play a montage, but you can see we need a skeletal mesh component, and we have already gotten one of those. Apparently we have not. Let's see. Skeletal mesh component. Right. We don't need to return a skeletal mesh object reference. We want to have a component because it's going to be part of an actor. So going back to our, let's compile and save just so everything is fine here. Go back to our interface and change the type over here. So skeletal mesh component. You can see that we have one over here. We'll take an object reference of that instead. Compile, save, and we close it. We go back to our ability. We can refresh this just to make sure it gets the correct type. It now says skeletal mesh component. Perfect. We drag it up here, like so. Okay, and everything is good and done and fine and awesome in the world. Right. Now, before we move on, we want to create another custom event. And this will be our end ability step. So when we have, if we've failed either of these, we want to end. So end ability. We also want to end after we have played the montage. So on completed, we hook up over here. However, there are other conditions when we could also end up with wanting to end, and that is if our montage for some reason gets interrupted. You might want to have some kind of other functionality somewhere, like maybe someone stuns you or something like that. Then you want to have that ability be interrupted here and stop having the whatever traits and abilities and properties that was running with that ability, because those gets removed here on the end ability step essentially. So that's why we want to have both of these two montage events essentially happening. And this is why we're using the play montage node also instead of the play anim montage, I think. Because this one has more usable events that we can make use of if we wanted to. We could also make use of this one if we wanted to, because this one is the one that's triggered when we start playing our montage, if we wanted to have some functionality at that point as well. Then we have our end step, and in this case we don't have a whole lot of functionality here right now. So we're actually going to be leaving it like this for now. Before we stop with this episode, however, we're going to be adding a little bit more functionality when it comes to later on. Because just like how we created some scaling ability when it came to the status effects, like having different power levels or different effect being driven by having a different level on a status effect, we may want to have something similar on our abilities as well. So let's create some variables for that. So first off, we can create something called current ability level. And we can make that one a float. And the reason we make it a float is because we might want to have a communication with a float curve. So we'll just set this to ability level 1 for now. And compile, and then we'll create a float actually. We can call this, I don't know, level curve. And make it of the type float curve. There. And in addition to that, we may also want to have a power multiplier, essentially saying what kind of scaling it should have in relation to the level curve. It's like just like we did with the status effect. So power multiplier. So you have many different knobs to turn if you want to tweak this at any point, like so. Okay, so also we might want to put the power multiplier at something by default. We might want to have something by default here for the level curve also, even though this level curve doesn't make a lot of sense because it was made for a leveling up. But if you want to make another one here, you can. But for now, we're just going to be using this as default or a fallback for now. Anyway, I think that might be a good place to stop. We have now created our rough foundation for our ability blueprint. I hope to see you in the next episode. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.